So let's talk about happiness. Knowing now that there are different things that make different people happy at different times in their life. And in the scientific literature, we distinguish between two specific types of happiness. There's your short-term happiness, which is the sort of happiness that can be temporarily raised or dropped, depending on things that happen to us every day, right? So that cup of coffee, that's going to make me happy in that moment, but it's not a long-lasting sort of happiness, is it? It's a temporary mood change, right? The same way that we'll go out and buy the handbag or buy the car, it's a temporary mood change. It's going to elevate our mood slightly, but it's not going to last. Our longer-term happiness, and the type that as scientists we're sort of more interested in, is our underlying trait or mood happiness. It's an evaluation of how happy we generally feel. And that is at the essence of that question that I asked you before about your satisfaction with your life as a whole. What that represents is a more underlying, stable form of happiness that is sort of the baseline that you go back to every time you get a little bit happy or every time you get a little bit sad. It's called subjective well-being in the scientific psychological literature, and it's becoming more and more used as an indicator of the progress of nations as opposed to sort of the traditional economic indicators of how we're doing. So your short-term happiness is the sort that you get in response to something nice happening, and your long-term happiness is more just a general feeling of contentment. The research that I've been involved in since beginning my PhD in 2008 is called the Australian Unity Wellbeing Index. This is a project that began in 2001 and we've now conducted 31 surveys of the Australian population. The project began as a partnership between Deakin University and Australian Unity, and the idea was to create something that was our own national indicator of progress, a social indicator, a psychological indicator of how we're all doing. And so since 2001, we've conducted, like I said, 31 surveys of the Australian population. Each survey has 2,000 participants who represent the Australian population in terms of their gender and geographic location. And that gives us now a very rich database of over 60,000 Australians who have answered that same question that you all answered before. And if I had to have a guess at what most of you would have answered in terms of how satisfied you are with your life as a whole, I would guess that most of you said about a 7 or an 8. These are the frequencies of responses that we've had over the years to just this one question. Here you've got your response from 0 to 10, and you've got your percentage of respondents up the side. And most people, you see here, are between a 7 or a 9. Most of them are at an 8 out of 10. Most people are about 80% happy most of the time. Why? Why aren't we 100% happy? Isn't happiness good? Don't we want to be happy? Why are we only at 80% or 70% or wherever you were? And more than that, why is it so predictable if different things make all of us happy in different ways? We try as scientists to understand things better and to understand things at a deeper level. And so we are not satisfied by asking how satisfied you are with your life as a whole. We want to know more. And so what we do is we ask further questions about people's satisfaction with different areas of their life that we know statistically contribute to your overall life satisfaction. So here's a fun game I like to play with an audience. There are 7 domains that universally contribute to our general life satisfaction. So when we ask the question, how satisfied are you with your life as a whole, we follow that up by asking 7 questions in the form of, how satisfied are you with blah? Any ideas? Health is one. Money, we don't call how satisfied are you with money, we say how satisfied are you with your standard of living, and that usually encompasses your money. Relationships is another one. Easy game, right? We've got health, we've got standard of living, we've got relationships. Community is another one. Very good. People don't always get that one. Work is covered under a different domain which we call satisfaction with sense of achievements, which we also mentioned earlier, or satisfaction with what you're achieving in life. Remembering that not all people work, and so people need to get that sense of achievement from somewhere else. We've got standard of living, health, relationships, achieving, community. There's 2 more.
Family.
Family gets covered under relationships.
Environment.
Getting closer. Nope. That actually, we'd all be down at 20%. No. We have another indicator that runs parallel to this called the National Wellbeing Index, and that includes aspects of satisfaction with life in Australia, and one of them is satisfaction with government. But it doesn't actually affect our personal subjective wellbeing.
Age.
Who's at age? Age is a demographic characteristic that we run everything by, but it itself is not a predictor.
Spiritual.
Spirituality is our optional 8th domain. Remembering that in Australia we live, I guess, in quite a multicultural society where not everybody has an affiliation to a sense of spirituality or religiosity, and we generally live in a society where where that's not sort of something that contributes every day to our general life satisfaction. In other countries, it certainly does. What's that?
What are your perceptions of yourself?
Yep, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. It's not a predictor, but it comes into play.
Housing and shelter.
Okay, now you're getting closer. I'll give you a hint. We're talking about physical safety or personal safety, so having a sense of safety is important to us. And there's one last one, which I'll give you as a freebie, which is a sense of satisfaction with your future security. So you need to know that there is something, and it also incorporates income a little bit. You need to know that there is something in the future to keep you safe. So these are our 7 domains of life, and what we do is we take the average of people's satisfaction with these 7 domains and we combine it into an overall score, which we call the Personal Wellbeing Index, and it very, very closely mirrors that single item question of how satisfied are you with your life as a whole. Bless you. So I'm going to show you what we know from our almost 15 years of research about the subjective wellbeing of Australians. Here, you've got all the surveys that we've done along here, from Survey 1 in April 2001 all the way through to Survey 31 in September last year. You've got up here your strength of satisfaction, and I should say that just for ease of interpretation, all of our scores that are on a 0 to 10 scale, we then convert to a 0 to 100 scale, so we can talk in terms of percentages. And our red line is the average of the 2,000 Australians' wellbeing scores at each time point. So what you can see is that the red line goes up, and then it goes down, and then it goes up, and it goes all over the place. But what's actually happening here is that the red line is actually only fluctuating within a very, very narrow range, this blue range of 73.9 to 76.7%, which means that we can predict that if we take a random representative sample of Australians, we can predict that their average wellbeing will lie somewhere between that 3 percentage point range. It's less than 3 percentage points. We also like to use this to not only follow how Australians are doing, but to look at whether there are certain events that might affect our wellbeing. And it also allows us, by looking at demographic factors like age, like even gender, work status, household income, it allows us to explore different things that are associated with wellbeing and that can affect wellbeing at a national level. I think I just gave something away, but see this spike here? August 2004, depending on how good your eyes are. What's responsible for that? What happened in August 2004? We've got the highest wellbeing ever recorded. That one's not quite as high.
Olympics.
Yeah, the Olympics. We actually happened to be collecting data over the days of the Olympic Games in Athens. And what we found was that with each gold medal Australia won over the days, our national wellbeing rose. 2 of the domains, sense of achievement and sense of community, were the ones that were responsible for that. We actually felt this vicarious sense of achievement as our athletes were winning gold medals. Along the way, we've been able to explore and apply this sort of methodology and apply this understanding to exploring the wellbeing of different communities that are exposed to different circumstances. So we've done studies looking at the well-being of people who are affected by the Victorian bushfires and the floods in Queensland. We've done studies on the well-being of informal carers who actually recorded lower well-being than any other group on record. And so we use this as our indicator of this is where Australians generally are, they should be. And so we can look at where everybody else is doing in comparison and use it to identify subgroups of the population who maybe aren't as happy as we think that they should be. Remembering still that our average is somewhere hovering around the 75% mark. So what we know, if we think about this sort of 75% of national happiness, what we know is that most people feel generally positive about their lives, right? 75% is in our upper spectrum of a 0 to 100% range. It's not 100%, but it's up there. And so there's a large body of research that attests to that 75% as being something that is stable, predictable, and meaningful. The idea is that we have what is called a set point for our happiness. We have a genetic set point. We are predisposed to be sitting at about 75% happy. The average set point, so not everybody has the same set point, we believe. Still finding it out. But set points on average lie somewhere between 70 and 90. But our happiness does change. The short-term happiness, right, changes around that. And the best way that I can explain this theory called subjective wellbeing homeostasis theory to you is by an analogy to your body temperature. So we all have a set body temperature, but our body temperature can fluctuate around that. It can fluctuate within a healthy range. Our body temperature can go up temporarily and it can go down temporarily. But when those changes to our body temperature occur, what do? We respond. What happens when we get too hot? When our body temperature goes up? What happens? We sweat, right? That's our body's attempt to cool itself down. It's our body employing its own homeostatic resources to return our body temperature to where it should be. The same happens when we get too cold. We'll shiver. That's our body trying to warm itself back up. If we're putting or overlaying subjective well-being or happiness onto that, our set point is at 75 degrees. We can go up in response to something nice happening, but we get brought back down to that level. It's not long-lasting. Our happiness can drop, and we can engage resources to bring it back up. But there is, as we say, a healthy range around our set point within which we're free to function. If something happens to challenge our level of subjective well-being to a point where it cannot be restored to its set point, then we're in trouble. In the same way that if our body temperature drops too low or goes too high, we're in need of further help. It's too much stress on the system. So when we're talking about subjective well-being and happiness and these resources that we use to maintain it at its healthy level, we talk about two different types of buffers. We talk about there being internal buffers and external buffers. The internal buffers have to do with what you mentioned before about a sense of self-worth or feeling good about yourself, self-confidence. Think about what happens when something happens to us to threaten our healthy level of subjective well-being. What happens when our happiness drops? What do we do pretty much automatically? So we have an internal dialogue. Good. We become our own personal therapist in a way. And we say to ourselves, it's okay, I'm good at other things. We say to ourselves, I knew that was going to happen. Or we say, it's all right, things will get better tomorrow. We engage in cognitive internal buffers by way of self-talk, by way of our own therapy, to restore our subjective well-being to its healthy point. And we generally do these automatically if we have those things ingrained and inbuilt. If we actually believe that we are a worthy person, then it's much easier to call upon that resource when we need it. We also have external buffers. External buffers are things that can be used as resources to help us deflect the negative intensity, I guess, or the negative valence of something that happens. This is a very important external buffer. Money. Money is important to happiness. And if anybody tells you otherwise, they're joking, or they've got too much of it. If you want to know how important money is to happiness, you just have to ask somebody who doesn't have any money, and they will tell you that that is what they need. They need money. But it's not the case that the more money you have, the happier you are, right? That doesn't make sense. It's not a linear relationship as such. Money is important because it allows us to pay for things, or it allows us to pay people to do things that we don't want to do. It allows us to deflect things that would otherwise stress us by making somebody else do them. So for example, if you can afford to have somebody to be your cleaner at home, you don't have to spend those days engaged in sometimes mindless activity. You can rather spend those hours enjoying your family, or making things, or doing something that you actually enjoy. Money is a flexible resource that allows us to defend against life's challenges. But as we said, it's not the case that the more money we have, the happier we are. Once we have enough money to cover our basic needs, it's not so easy after that to buy anything more that we want, or that contributes to our happiness. In Australia, what we found is that that level is at about $100,000 of annual household income. Once we're earning that amount, the cost of happiness is a lot more. So it's not the case that people who earn $150,000 are 10 points less happy than people who earn $500,000. There's no longer a significant difference up there. There's a great article, one of my favourites is by a guy called Dan Gilbert in the US, who's sort of like he's a guy who's like Mythbusters for psychology. Like he goes around and he writes these articles about all these things just to show people that all these generalizations are not true. And he wrote an article called, I think it's called, "If Money Isn't Making You Happy, Then You're Not Spending It Right." And he talked about the relationship between money and happiness. It's a good one to look up. The other external buffer that we talk about that helps to sustain our well-being is having a close relationship. And a close relationship is important for a number of reasons. The first is that it gives you somebody to complain to about all the negative things in your life when you come home at the end of the day. And the other is that when you have a close partner, what they actually do is they help to reinforce what should be your automatic internal buffers. So sometimes we find it hard to say to ourselves when something goes wrong, "Oh, I'm good at other things." Sometimes that's not so easy for people, but if you have a close partner to come home to and they can tell you, "It's okay, I still love you, you still are meaningful to me, you are still important," it's like having your own, again, personal therapist to boost you back up. When we look at the data of what we know about relationships and well-being, here, the yellow line is what we call our normal range. So that's our 73.9 to 76.7. Here's our well-being score. Married people in our surveys always have the highest level of well-being on average, assuming they're still married because they want to be. People who are in a de facto relationship are up there too. People who are never married fall below the normal range. People who are separated, even lower. Divorcees are higher than separated people, usually because the separated part is the hard part. Once you're actually divorced, there is actually some resolution to the separation. And here we have our widows. They're my favourite. They're my favourite group. We always have a group of widows in our surveys. We pick them up all the time. There's a group of them who are over the age of 76 years. They're widowed and they have an income over $250,000. And these ladies are loving life. They are having a great time. I guess if you want to put something, a nice little spin on this, I always like to say it represents the old saying, it's better to have loved and lost through death than to never to have loved at all. Let's have a look at what happens. Money and relationships together on income. This figure represents, along the bottom we've got the average household income. So this is starting people who earn less than 15,000 up to people who earn over 150,000. You can see here this blue line. This is for people who have a partner, who only live with their partner. You can see that their well-being, even if they're earning less than $15,000, is up at the top end of the normal range. And it goes up. So having a partner and money, on average, you're up there at that top. Let's chuck in some children. Red line. This is what children do to your well-being. When you don't have enough money to afford them, they're a strain on your well-being. They're a strain on your financial resources. Only once we get enough money to actually be able to afford our children does that red line sort of come up close to the blue. Let's have a look what happens now if we take away the partner. These are our sole parents. Okay, so these are people living just with their children. And what you can see is that even with increased income, sort of no amount of higher income can really get them to that same point as the power of having a relationship.